The study said that these anxieties were removed or completely eliminated with search because you are your own boss and you are in control of your own career path. That strongly resonated with me when I did my 20-page paper. And so I was quite surprised that I think roughly only 8 or 10% of searchers are female.
Welcome to Season 3 of the Founder Funded podcast, a podcast for searchers by search experts where we explore the route to business ownership without having that $1 million idea. I'm your host, Carl Lundberg, CEO at Gerald Edelman and founder of the ETA Awards. Let's get into it. Being a searcher is just like being repeatedly punched in the face for 2 years.
That's how I felt every day for the last 2 years.
Yeah, right.
Would it be easier if I were a white male searcher? I would say maybe yes, but that didn't deter me from searching and acquiring a business. I would say an intern machine was a bit of an overstatement.
This episode's guest is Linh Van Deibel. Linh is Director of Infrastructure Design Solutions Limited, which is a B2B services provider in the telecom space that she acquired earlier this year. Linh, it's such a pleasure to have you on. We've known each other for quite some time, and it means that I've been able to observe your journey right through the search process, which has been great. It'd be great just to start for the listeners, a bit of background about you, the person, and where you've come from and kind of how you've ended up here.
Of course, and thanks so much for having me here, Carl, and thanks for your kind intro. For listeners, my name is Linh Van Deibel. I am the co-founder of Acacia Partners, a long-term holding family vehicle alongside my husband, whom I met in business school. In terms of background, I was born and raised in Vietnam. I moved to the US for college and spent 8 years there before moving to the UK. And I have been living in London and working here in London for the last 12 years. In terms of our career before search, Leo and I both have the typical MBA background. So Leo started out his career as a consultant at BCG before business school. And after school, he worked in large cap private equity across Europe. And my career, I had the traditional finance background, started out at JP Morgan in New York, then transitioned to private equity, and then went to business school where I studied entrepreneurship and innovation. So after business school, I transitioned from investing to operations. So I first joined a fintech startup founded by my former boss in private equity to help him run M&A and strategy. It was, the company now is very successful, but I remember joining at a really exciting time. It was the beginning of COVID, and I joined as employee number 50. A year and a half later, I left as employee number 1,500.
Wow.
And during that period, we did 5 acquisitions, some of which were valued at a couple of £100 million, and over a dozen minority transactions. So we were very busy, very, very active in trying to grow the business, both organically and inorganically. It was really exciting to do so many acquisitions in that short period of time. But looking back, the integrations were proven to be very challenging and time-consuming. So I took a lot of the lessons that I learned there and applied that at Acacia Partners. Fast forward, I joined another fintech startup as Chief Strategy Officer. And when the fintech boom busted in 2023, I left and spent a couple of months soul searching before founding Acacia Partners, first as a solo self-funded searcher, and then my husband joined me 10 months in, and we happily acquired Infrastructure Design Solutions earlier this year.
Brilliant. What a great story. Was it M&A you were doing at the startup where you did all those?
Exactly.
That was your focus?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so lots of M&A experience, which I suppose we can get onto the parallels between what you were doing there and then acquiring an SME. Okay, so from Vietnam to the States and London, and it was while you were at Wharton that you first heard about search and entrepreneurship through acquisition. Could you tell me about what happened there?
It was quite a long journey. So I did hear about ETA during my first semester in my first year at Wharton. It was an alum who went to the same undergrad, who also went to Wharton, I would say 7 or 9 years earlier. he reached out to me by email, and it was a very long email. Basically, he was saying that he was running a very successful sovereign wealth fund in Europe. He was extremely bullish on the Vietnamese market, and he told me about the idea of ETA. He shared with me the Stanford search study, and he said that he would be willing to back me 100% if I were to raise a traditional search fund in Vietnam. So that was when I first learned about ETA as a new asset class and a new career path. But to me, the idea of moving to a tier 2, tier 3 city in Vietnam to run a business, a manufacturing business, was just not interesting at that time. My idea was to move back to London. So I kindly declined his offer. And fast forward to 2023, when I left fintech, my career in fintech, I had 2 full-time job offers. One was to go back to private equity at a really great fund, and the other was to join as CFO at a Series C startup that was acquired by a bank, so they're very well capitalized. 2 great career options, but I remember going home after visiting the office, the startup office, and feeling completely demotivated. So I went back to my drawing board and kind of asked myself what I wanted to do long term. And it was drawn from my frustrations with my previous career path, and I did not want to make the same mistake again. So I know that I want the freedom, the autonomy to have control over my own career path and my own schedule in the future when I want to have a family and have children. And I also want to build something out on my own, maybe not something as risky as startups. And so what I did was I declined the 2 job offers. I spent a couple of months soul searching. I revisited the search fund thesis. I did not like the idea of traditional search fund. And I was aware of the new models, which are self-funded search, independent sponsor. I came across the Search Investment Group, and they had a white paper about self-funded search. Yeah. And funny enough, they were having their first self-funded search conference in Dallas. So I flew out to Dallas in September 2023, and I think I was the only international attendee. Everyone else was from Dallas. On top of that, I also reached out to 70 to 80 different searchers to kind of understand different perspectives. And I wanted to lay out all the options that I have on the table. So I talked to searchers who have successfully raised a fund, successfully acquired a business, and successfully exited their business. I also talked to searchers who have successfully raised a fund, successfully acquired a business, but ended up winding down the business, and it was extremely painful. I talked to searchers who have successfully raised a fund, but did not end up acquiring and have to go back to a traditional job. I also talked to some searchers here in the UK who unfortunately couldn't raise a fund after over a year. And so I did that over a period of 2-3 months and ended up writing a 20-page document that I called Search Fund Exploration to pitch to my husband and get his buy-in on what I wanted to do next with my career. And I was quite deliberate about writing out the document, laying out the pros and cons of different search models, and compare those against the 2 options that I have at that time, which was a career in PE and a startup. And eventually decided to go with the self-funded search model.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that, you wanted to, clearly you're someone who likes detail and wanted to really understand all the different options available to you. Very wise. The entrepreneurial flair is where you then used the paper that you wrote to satisfy your need for detail to convince your husband that this was the right thing to do. And I think it's really important, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. It's really important that the searcher has the buy-in of their spouse, because and actually that their spouse or their partner has to really understand what it means, because it's is going to put pressure on a household, is going to put pressure on things, it's going to change your life, both of your lives. But clearly you did such a good job of your paper that you managed to convince your husband to actually leave his job and join the search. So tell me about that.
It was. I did not expect him to join the search 10 months in. But to answer your question, it is extremely important to get buy-in from your spouse when you do a search, because it's a huge financial commitment, emotional commitment. So in terms of financial, we went from a 2-earner household to a 1-earner household. So I had to make sure that my husband would feel comfortable with that. And he was fully supportive of me doing and following my long-term dream. The emotional commitment, I would say, was a bit underrated, because as a solo self-funded searcher, I did not have the proper support system in place. I did not have a team. I was working alone in my bedroom every day. I did not have a board and investors there to support me. So it was a lot of ups and downs when you search, and we can get into that in further details later on. But having that both the financial and emotional support from your spouse is really important, because we're not just talking about a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We're talking about a minimum a year to find a business. Some people spend 3 to 4 years. So I did budget in 2 years, at least 2 years, to do my search. And I would say having your social network, your friends around you, is also very important. But I would say a lot of my friends who are still in private equity, consulting, banking, or corporate jobs, they do not fully understand the stress that I'm going through when it comes to no income, no safety net, making a huge bet on my career that might not pan out for the next 2-3 years. And on top of that, the day-to-day rejections during a search, and there's so many rejections left and right. The doubts that whether you're gonna make it or not, because search is a binary process, whether you make it or you don't. And in between, you're just floating around. And so I would say having your spouse there and support you and understand that is very important. And I wouldn't be able to do it without my husband's support.
Yeah, no, I completely get that, and it completely sympathize and you know, to the extent possible, understand all of it. And I remember having conversations with you fairly early on in you know, in your search journey, where we had met for a coffee, and you've gone from being in a very grown-up job to, like, as you say, sort of floating around London thinking, I need to buy a company. What do I do? You know, but you know, it's perseverance and resilience is something we talk about a lot on the podcast. And clearly, you know, you've experienced the need for that and have thankfully been really successful in achieving, making an acquisition, which is great. So in your obviously you did a great job of convincing Leo to join the search. But actually, I just wanted to get into a bit more on your paper, your 20-page paper, which I haven't seen, but I'm quite interested in. What was it that, you know, you went through the kind of traditional search fund, self-funded search, independent sponsor, and then also compared it to, you know, taking a job in private equity and a startup. What was it that led you to the self-funded search route as opposed to the others?
I would say there are pros and cons to each model, and it really depends on each individual circumstances, whether a model works. I would say the self-funded search model is the most risky of all of them, because you're truly on your own, and you have no salary, you have no benefits, you have no support system. You're truly out there on your own until you find and source a deal. You bring the deal to the investors and you try to close a deal on your own. But if things, you know, go south at the 11th hour, or anywhere in between the deal process, you end up having to incur the broken deal fees. And so for me, the reason why I wrote the paper was I wanted to make sure I go into it with my eyes wide open and that I go into it for the right reasons. For me personally, I think that the long-term personal rewards of doing a search outweigh the short-term pain. So I was obviously the short-term pain for self-funded search, as I had mentioned, was that you're there on your own, you have no salary, you have no certainty over your life for the next couple of years.
Yeah.
But the long-term benefit of it is that for me, going back to my drawing board, I know that I want the freedom, the autonomy, and control over my own business. I also want to be able to experience entrepreneurship in one shape or the other. And so that's the reason why I decided to go with the self-funded search. Obviously, for the traditional search model, which I did think about, and that was very common in the MBA programs, it is quite nice to be able to receive a salary, to have an office of your own instead of working in your bedroom. It's nice to fly around and go to attend different conferences. But I just did not like the idea of having to pay back 1.5 times investors' money.
Yeah.
And after everything that you bring in, you only get maximum 25% equity in the business, and you have a board to report to, which absolutely did not work for me in that stage of my career.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I completely understand that. I think there's, as you say, there's pros and cons of both models. Some people like first of all, the economic safety net of a traditional search fund.
Yeah.
But also the mentorship and guidance of the investors, which is really the true kind of reason for forming that board. But again, at the same time, you've got people who just want to own a business and have total autonomy, and that's why they're doing this, and that is inconsistent with the traditional search fund model. So completely respect your and I think you need courage to do the self-funded route. As you say, you're probably the most exposed. It's probably the furthest along the entrepreneurial line compared to the others, where it's closest almost to a startup and that kind of binary risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think even though the self-funded search model is the highest risk of all the different search models, I still think it's much safer than startup. Obviously, we all know that roughly 90% of startups fail at some stage, and the statistics I'm quoting now is a few years old, but 75% of search funds ended up acquiring a business. And of those businesses, roughly 90% end up generating returns to investors. So we are talking about a 2/3 success rate compared to a 10% success rate for a startup. And I'm happy to take that bet all day long.
Yeah.
So for me, even though the self-funded search is still risky, it is still relatively safe compared to starting a business from scratch.
Completely understood, and absolutely agree. I think it's why I love the model so much. Lynn, you touched on rejection and kind of this resilience point. I think it was Gareth Hawkins or someone has described searchers. Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face, and being a searcher is just like being repeatedly punched in the face for 2 years.
That's how I felt every day for the last 2 years.
Yeah, right. So it's tough. I think there's also probably added challenges, I think, to your situation. There's not a huge amount of women in the search space. What's your experience been there? Do you think you've had a tougher time as a woman in the space trying to get in to speak to owner managers? Probably most of them are white middle class men.
I would say obviously everyone has their unique situations. I wouldn't say I have a tougher time than some others, but maybe I can share some anecdotes. Maybe that helps some other aspiring female searchers who are listening who can resonate with. So in the beginning of my search, I was trying to build out my network of SME brokers. And I spent lots of time trying to take brokers out for coffee or meet them in their offices. And I can't tell you the number of times brokers would tell me to bring a quote unquote older male figure into meetings because I'm considered the quote unquote soft figure. And for some reason, they think that the older male figure would help me win over sellers in important meetings. And so I did think about that for a number of days, quite seriously. I I was joking about this with my husband yesterday, and he was laughing, but I was considering wearing dark lipsticks and heavy makeup to make myself look older. I was considering wearing bulkier, etchy clothes to make myself look bigger. And obviously, those funny thoughts died down after a couple of days. What I did was I just dragged my husband along in important seller meetings, even though he's not an older figure, he's a male figure. And funny enough, in those meetings, I obviously was in charge of all the communications up until that point. I was leading the conversation. I was doing all the talking. But when an important decision has to be made, all eyes turn to Leo, my husband. And so it was a funny situation. I'm laughing about it now. But I would say it didn't discourage me from search. I had developed pretty thick skin during my days in banking. So I think for me, the challenge was to test out my thesis that my ability to acquire a business would not be impacted by my race or my gender. And so what I did was I talked to a few international searchers here in the UK, and I'm really grateful for those conversations because they were really helpful in reassuring to me that it is okay to be yourself, and you will find one way or another to resonate with the sellers. So fast forward now 2 years into this SME market, I appreciated the advice because I myself found out that SME businesses are oftentimes run by husbands and wives. And so the idea of having another female owner running the business is not strange to them. And I was able to resonate with some sellers, and obviously I had no problem closing a deal. So I would say, would it be easier if I were a white male searcher? I would say maybe yes, but that didn't deter me from searching and acquiring a business.
Yeah, good. Well, not good, but good. Yeah, definitely. It should, make you want to do it even more. Really,
Exactly. Yeah.
and it seems like the worst of the experience actually came from probably. Doesn't sound too derogatory, but the slightly less sophisticated brokers who don't really know what they're doing anyway. And
it's still a very male-dominant industry in the SME market, so it is to be expected.
Yeah, and look, Leo's got a very strong career background and CV, but no more than you. So when you're sitting in a meeting, there's no reason other than the fact that he is male or perhaps looks more similar to the sellers that they would turn their attention to him. But, they did. But what's great is that, you kind of anticipated it. You knew that you may come up with some resistance there, and you managed to kind of push through it. You shouldn't have to, but you did, and you've acquired anyway. And I think it's really good that, there's other female searchers can kind of point to you and look up to your success story and kind of follow the path, which is great. So that's that's really helpful insight. Your search process and how you built your pipeline. I've spoken to other people about this in the past, but sort of teasing you slightly that at one point you had 300 interns working and there's this machine. I know it wasn't quite that many, but you did build quite a slick kind of intern machine. Can you maybe talk a bit about that for your proprietary outreach?
I would say an intern machine was a bit of an overstatement. But at one point in the beginning, I did have quite a few interns. I would say it's a lot of work to manage the interns because a lot of these are fresh undergrads, freshmen or sophomore. And you yourself have to be really organized, really structured. You have to know exactly what you're going to do so that you can tell them what they need to do. It is a lot of work. And so I wouldn't say having interns would help accelerate your search per se. There are AI tools out there that can really help you with your search without having the need to tap into interns. For me, I always enjoy mentoring others. So when I was in college, I was teaching assistant every semester. So that mentoring aspect is really important for me. And I would say my interns were my support system. They were my colleagues. And instead of working from home every day, sometimes the interns would come to my house and we work in the living room. Sometimes we go to a cafe and work together. They really helped keep me in check and kind of help me progress with my search in one way or the other. And so it was important, I would say, for my mental health to have the interns. And I still keep in touch with a lot of the interns from my initial cohorts. I got one reaching out to me 3 weeks ago saying he really appreciated all the things he learned during his time at Acacia and that he was able to get an investment banking full-time job offer at Jefferies in New York.
Right.
Another intern was able to use the experience to get a bulge bracket bank internship. And so receiving these emails really made my day. And so if I were to do it again, I would still choose to work with interns.
And they were doing kind of the proprietary outreach stuff for you.
So I would task them with finding contacts. So on the broker side, they helped me build out a list of 4,000 SME broker contacts. On the proprietary side as well, in the beginning, I was trying to focus on certain industries, and they were helping me find contacts, and that was quite helpful. But again, as I said, it's a lot of teaching and a lot of educating them what they need to do. And these days, a lot of the AI tools can do that automatically for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the AI tools, do you think that that's the skepticism of sellers when they receive outreach now is going to be increased by the fact that there's so many of these AI tools? Do you think they're more likely to dismiss it and therefore it's going to make proprietary outreach harder, actually?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I receive a lot of outreaches and I just delete. I don't even open the email. I just delete. So I do think searchers have to be more creative in their outreach. And I say be more persistent in their outreach. I think it's getting harder, as you said.
And your pipeline, what was the mix of your pipeline at any kind of given time on average between proprietary sourced and brokered?
So when I went to the Self-Funded Search Conference hosted by SIG, the SIG and all the speakers there were strong advocate of brokered outreach because self-funded search have very limited resources. You don't want to spend a few months trying to educate the sellers and helping them build out the data room and all the documents and stuff. So I thought that, in the UK, it's a very crowded market. Maybe I'd go half and half in the beginning, and that's what I did. For the first 6 months. I go 50% proprietary, 50% brokered outreach. And then after kind of 7 or 8 months, I decided to go 90% brokered because it's just so time consuming with proprietary deals. And you really have to stomach that. And I think being able to find the right brokers can really help accelerate your deals because they do the job of educating the sellers about the market condition, about the valuation for the business, and about the whole process on your behalf, so you don't have to spend months doing that yourself.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful for our first deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sadly there's not enough brokers out there that do that. So I suppose when you do find some that do, and help you with that credibility piece.
Exactly. There are not many out there.
There aren't. And I find quite often I'm having to justify why my clients are suitable buyers by pointing to, a long list of deal tombstones where people have done exactly the same thing. Where the initial reaction is, well, it's an MBI, they haven't got any money, I'm not even going to entertain this. And actually, these deals do get done. And in fact, it's an incredibly busy, successful market. And I think that we still need more education. So finding brokers who understand is really useful.
I would say, sorry to interrupt,
go on.
I would say definitely try both. For proprietary deal, I think it makes more sense if you have an industry focus.
Yes.
You're trying to build a platform, then it makes a lot of sense. But I was just being mindful of time, and I did set myself a certain time until I get into the LOI stage, because I do want to budget roughly 6 months from LOI to completion, and kind of counting backwards my 1.5 to 2 years timeline. I do not have a lot of time. And when I had the initial conversations on the proprietary deals, it was very frustrating because some sellers have really sky-high expectations for their businesses.
And they just add back everything. And so actually, interesting, talking about LOI stage, you were running 2 deals in parallel at one point. And obviously one of them completed, which is great. The other one didn't. Perhaps you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes. It was, to answer your question, it was extremely stressful running 2 deals at the same time. So to give you context, the first deal was a proprietary deal. It lasted 9 months from LOI till when the deal fell apart. The second was a broker deal, and we completed it 4 months from signing LOI. I would say the deal process itself was stressful because you as a searcher have to wear so many different hats and have to manage so many different stakeholders. You obviously have to engage the financial advisor to do Q of E and financial and tax due diligence. You have to engage the lawyer, the M&A lawyer, to do the legal due diligence and draft all the documents like the SBA, SHA, employment contracts, etc. You then have to engage with lenders here in the UK. And fun fact for those who haven't gone through this process, each lender here in the UK has their own process and their own requirements. So if you engage with 2 or 3 lenders, you are doing 2 or 3 separate processes at the same time. And then you engage with the broker, you engage with the sellers, you fundraise from investors, and then you check in with all these stakeholders every week to make sure that the deal progresses. So it is a lot at stake. And even though it was kind of a 4-month or 9-month marathon, every day it felt like a sprint, at least for us, because we all know that time kills deals. And in our case, for the proprietary deal, the sellers refused to spend money on proper advisors. So he did not have a proper M&A lawyer. He had an accountant who works Monday to Wednesday, so a part-time accountant. And so we had to double down on effort to help him build out the whole data room, and that took us 3 months. So it was really stressful even for the 2 of us. To answer your second question about the deal that fell apart, it was a proprietary deal. It fell apart probably 100 times, but the 2 times it fell apart at the 11th hour. The first time was because our lender walked out on us literally at the 11th hour. 5 days before completion. And we still did not really understand the reason why they mentioned that they could not back the deal after we've been under exclusivity for 1.5 months, that they cannot back MBI, so management buy-in transactions, even though this was clearly communicated at the beginning when we were introducing ourselves as Acacia Partners. That wasn't a problem because that's something we could fix. So we quickly engaged with another lender, and within a month, we were able to get their IC approval. Investors were ready to wire their money. Everything was kind of in check, documents ready to sign. 3 days before completion date, their largest customer threatened to bring the solutions in-house. And so that was something that we could not control. And we could not take that lightly. We did not have a lot of understanding. We did not have the background, the context around what happened back then. And the stakes were high. But we decided to pull the plug. And it was really, really painful because we could have closed a deal.
Yeah.
And so we decided to pull the plug. And I think it's a great lesson here for aspiring searchers out there to do it for the right reason, because no matter how further out you are in the process, you should still be able to say no for the right reason. And so now looking back, we're glad that we did.
I think it comes back to courage. You know, it's deal fever, sunk cost fallacy, all these things. You know?
Yes, we were incurring hundreds and thousands of pounds of broken deal fees at that point. It was just heartbroken because I consider that my baby. I spent 9 months nurturing it, so it was really.
And particularly a proprietary deal that you've kind of originated right from the beginning. But you're better buying nothing than buying the wrong company when you've got a commercial red flag.
Yeah.
Thankfully you had another deal to focus on and you managed to get that over the line, which is fantastic.
And that came back to one of my conversations with a former searcher who spent 5 years trying to revive his business. And it was 5 years in hell. And I did not want that for our family.
Yeah. Well, what a great decision to have made at the time. So just you mentioned briefly there your investors are ready to go. It'd be good to understand. I know you're oversubscribed as well on your deal. I think on both deals actually. So just to perhaps, as much as you're happy to share about what your cap table looks like and kind of how you went about raising that equity at what time, because there's always this kind of chicken and egg piece of where you don't have a deal yet, so we can't commit to anything, and and it's difficult to get your foot in until you've got the investors. So just a little bit how you raise that equity would be helpful.
So we were fortunate that we were oversubscribed on both deals. And in fact, we spent a lot of time fundraising than we should have. But we were deliberate about it because we wanted to avoid the single risk concentration, which is, again, let's think of a scenario at the 11th hour, that single investor decided for, some reason, change his mind, and then the deal falls apart. We don't want that risk. We don't want to have another headache to worry about when the stakes are so high at the 11th hour.
And you already have that risk with the lender, of course, as
exactly.
you well know. Yeah.
So and I share that because there were some investors were willing to back 100% of our deals, 2 separate deals, but we decided to raise from 8 to 10 investors for each deal. And we found out that it was hard to raise 50 to 100,000 pounds, as hard to raise 50 to 100,000 pounds as raising £1 million. Because you go through the same process, you talk to the same people, you share the documents, you engage in the same conversations. And so we ended up targeting high net worth individuals who were comfortable with the terms, who would like the business the opportunities that we pitch. And I would say the whole process took us 3 months. And I did build out a whole pipeline and kind of the probability rate, from the beginning when you do the outreach, what percentage will, get a first phone call and what percentage will sign the NDA, and then what percentage will then engage to further asking for access to the data room, and then what percentage will give soft commitment, and then what percentage gives hard commitment, and then kind of work backwards to the number of contacts we need to reach out to. And I think that was roughly like 300, 400 people. So it was quite a bit of a process that you have to run at the same time while you're doing other things.
Well, you certainly did it well to have become oversubscribed on both deals, and obviously, gained you, I guess, also a decent story to tell the sellers that, you've got these people who are interested to fund it. You've got the equity there, albeit it's not, committed, but it's soft committed at that stage, I guess. And then the lending piece was obviously, the
Yeah.
same risk as everyone else has in these
Yeah,
IPOs.
absolutely. And we were quite deliberate about choosing the types of investors we want to bring on. So we want people with relevant industry experience. We do not have, because we both have kind of finance and some operational background, we do not have strong sales background. So we wanted somebody with strong sales and marketing experience. We also want investors who can help us do M&A later on and know the market, know the network in the market really well. So we were quite deliberate about building out that group of investors. And we are very fortunate that we have a very supportive group of investors who back our deal.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions that I guess probably make sense to kind of group together here. And so you can tackle them how you like, but it's kind of based around the female and the international aspect of your experience and your struggle. Struggle perhaps is maybe a
Challenge, not struggle.
Yeah, challenge but everyone has their own challenges, right? But you've had, as you said at the beginning, you're in a unique position as everyone else is, and you've had your own challenges to overcome. So the two things that I guess would be really useful is how do we improve the space for female searchers, and maybe linked to that is what advice would you give to aspiring, female searchers and search CEOs?
I haven't really looked into the solution to this, so maybe I can give an observation and my personal experience so that it can resonate with other female searchers out there. So the observation is that Yale published a study that says female searchers can overcome a lot of anxieties that one might experience in a traditional finance role. Those anxieties were either, whether they can climb the corporate ladder, whether they have the right support system, whether their boss might have, their best interest in promoting their career path and professional development, whether they are being treated fairly at work. The study said that these anxieties were removed or completely eliminated with search because you are your own boss and you are in control of your own career path. And that strongly resonated with me when I did my 20-page paper. And so I was quite surprised that I think roughly only 8 or 10% of searchers are female, which is very small. So having done the search myself, I say that there are a few additional factors that female searchers have to take into account. And those things would be around family planning and having children, and kind of with search, it is uncertain. You don't know when you're going to acquire a business. And even when you acquire a business, you don't know whether you might have to move to a new location to accommodate the new business. And so there are a lot of uncertainties with search that the female searcher would need to take into account. Whereas if I hadn't gotten back to my cushion corporate job, I wouldn't have to worry about maternity leave. I would have certainty over kind of my family planning and my future. So I'm sharing this and my personal experience so that others might resonate. So I was at the beginning of my fertility journey when I started out my search. And I was fully aware that on some days, the fertility medications might drive up my hormone 10, 15 times, and I might go crazy. I might be very impatient. I might be in a lot of pain. I might not be as productive. But that's okay, at least for me, because going back to my drawing board, the long-term personal rewards really outweigh the short-term pain. And you shouldn't really let these sort of short-term obstacles delay you from achieving your long-term plan, because nobody knows what will happen. Maybe you find a great business within 5 months and you acquire after 8 months or 9 months. I've talked to a lot of female searchers who had babies during their search, One lady had a baby right after she acquired a business, and she somehow managed to make it work.
Wow.
So I would say to other aspiring female searchers out there to, to go ahead and give it a try, because obviously you have to be in it for the right reason, but there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't give it a try.
Yeah, great. No, that's really helpful, and thank you for sharing that. So I've got a standard final question. You mentioned actually earlier your dream actually in the context of acquiring a company and kind of setting up Acacia and running that out. So what I ask everyone on this series is, what is your dream today, and how has that changed from when you were younger? And it's quite a broad question, so you can interpret it however you like and answer it however you feel comfortable.
I would say my dream ties to kind of my upbringing. So my grandmother and my mother are both small business owners in Vietnam. And if you know the history of Vietnam, we experienced wars up until the 1970s. So while the men went to fight in the war, the women stayed behind to raise the family and take care of the family businesses. So I grew up with that mentality that one day I will run my own business as my grandmother and my mother. That dream did fade away when I was studying in the US, undergrad, studying in finance. The shining armor was to get a job on Wall Street.
Yep.
So that's what I did.
Yep.
And after a year working on Wall Street, I quickly realized that I was just part of a big machine. Whatever I do would make absolutely no impact. So I was very demotivated during that time period. So now looking back, I'm really glad that I came across ETA as a career path.
Excellent. Good. So you're in effect living your dream.
Exactly.
Lynn, thank you very much for coming on. It's been really great talking to you. There's been some really interesting insights there, and I think people will take a lot away from that. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Found and Funded Pod and LinkedIn at the Found and Funded Podcast, and comment on who you'd like to see us sit down with next. If you have any questions about what we discussed today, drop me a message and let's have a chat.